So uh, earlier this year, we got to watch a documentary on Discovery Plus about Hillsong, and that was interesting. Um, Lots of problematic things going on, at Hillsong that documentary talked about and sort of delved into the details of. And it wasn't long after that release that Brian Houston stepped down from his role as the pastor of Hillsong Australia. And he's also just the founder of the whole thing, the whole movement. And so he stepped down over allegations that he knowingly helped cover up abuse that his father had been involved in, some sexual abuse and misconduct. And essentially, the board at Hillsong was trying to figure out how to approach this, and he ended up resigning, and that was that. And we haven't heard anything from him until this past week. He went on his Instagram to share a little bit. He has been preaching, by the way, at other churches, even though it was a part of his agreement that he was going to take a break from ministry for a while. But he's been preaching at all sorts of other churches. Churches have been inviting him as a guest speaker, and so he's had speaking engagements, but he hasn't spoken directly about this situation at Hillsong and the accusations that have come against him. Apparently, there were other things that the board addressed as patterns of alcohol abuse and abuse of sleeping pills, and just a lot of problematic patterns that they saw. Anyway, he posted a video to Instagram this past week. It's a little long, but I do think we should watch the whole thing, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. I think it's about 8 minutes, but I just think you have to see the whole thing to really understand. And this is our last thing for the day. So
we're about to watch an 8-minute video.
Let's buckle up.
All right.
We need to get new chairs.
You got your popcorn.
Well, hi there. I pray you're doing well and that you can see God working for you in every circumstance.
Thank you.
Bobby and I have certainly been tested in that this year, and tested too in exhortations like 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 18, which says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you." I actually thought it was time, almost 8 months since my abrupt resignation from Hillsong Church, to bring some clarification from our perspective to the events surrounding my resignation and much of the current narrative. I'm speaking especially to the congregation of Hillsong Church, who, well, we love so much. I'm not going to talk too much about our experiences over the past 12 months with the current leadership or the church board or the now defunct eldership of Hillsong Church. That may be a conversation for another time. But this conversation is bringing perspective to the story surrounding my resignation, Bobby's termination, and I guess our experiences. So I'll start with my resignation. On March the 21st, 2022, in unison with Bobby, I made the hardest decision of my life. And that was to offer my resignation to the Hillsong Church board after pioneering the church in 1983 and giving 39 years of service. I guess a big part of me hoped that the board, knowing the pressure I was under, would reject my offer and continue to fight for me, but that was not to be. We certainly did not want to just abandon the Hillsong congregation, as some have suggested. We adore the people of Hillsong Church, and to be honest, we miss you all terribly. I've often said the real gold at Hillsong Church is not the music, the lights, and all those external things. The true gold is the people. We've been through utter grief this year as we come to grips with all that has happened and the overwhelming sense of loss as so much and so many we have loved and given our whole life to has been ripped away from us. We would have loved the opportunity to have said a proper goodbye to the Hillsong congregation, but sadly to date, that opportunity has not been afforded to us. I want to be clear. The media and others incorrectly say I resigned because I breached the Hillsong Code of Conduct, but that's just not true. I didn't resign because of my mistakes. I resigned because of the announcements and statements that have been made, which Bobby and I felt made my position untenable. And I spelled out my reasons for my resignation in my resignation letter to the Hillsong Church Board. Here are some excerpts that I'll read from my letter to the board, and please note, I didn't see the board's statement of March 18th until after it was made public and was sent to Hillsong's global database. So in direct quotes from my resignation letter, I said, the board's statement to the church has made my position untenable. The board gave enough detail to allow people's imaginations to run wild and draw their own conclusions. The statement did nothing to add my perspective. So understand, I'm reading my resignation letter, just portions of it. So further on, I said the statements that have been made have left me with no choice but to end our time as pastors and leaders of Hillsong Church. And then in another part of my resignation letter, I said, thank you for the opportunity. It has been an honor, and I can truthfully say Hillsong Church is our life's work. I have no intention of retiring, and in the future will still be in ministry, whatever that looks like and wherever that is. My hope is that I could have an active role as founding pastor of our church. That's what I wrote to the board, and that's the resignation that the board were quick to accept. Sadly, in the statements and announcements made, there was enough detail to pour ultimate shame and humiliation on me, but enough ambiguity to leave people to make their own conclusions about what did or didn't happen. Frankly, in many cases, those conclusions are wrong. In my heartfelt apology to the people of Hillsong Church and to the church at large, I spoke about alcohol as having not proven itself to be my friend. But sadly, that has built a narrative out there that I'm an alcoholic, and the stories about my alcoholism that are the result of gossip and whispering and innuendo. The narrative that I'm an alcoholic is false. In fact, I've been told by an expert therapist that I do not display the behaviors that are typical of an alcoholic. My apology was about the specific incidents of which the board are aware, incidents which were unbecoming for a minister of the gospel, and for which I'm deeply sorry. And then prescription medication. It was in the early 2000s, with my constant global travel and the stress I was under, I became dependent on sleeping tablets, which I've spoken about openly many times, including in my book, Live, Love, Lead. But let me be clear. The last time I took a single sleeping tablet was over 10 years ago. And even though I've continued to travel widely, I haven't taken even one sleeping tablet for a decade. It's not an ongoing problem. And the notorious night in 2019, where I mixed a double dose of anti-anxiety tablets with alcohol, was a one-off occasion. It happened once. It hadn't happened before, and it hasn't happened since. So I don't have an ongoing problem with anti-anxiety tablets or any other prescription medication. And I respectfully ask you to please not label me that way or blindly accept that narrative. So in January, I announced to the church that I was stepping aside for 12 months. So our departure from Hillsong was actually a progression. When over 12 months ago I was charged with a crime that I'm yet to defend and that I will fight, I was told I would need to step down as chairman of the board, which I did. Then later, I was told I could no longer be on the board, so I stepped aside. And that was followed a couple of months later when I was told I needed to step back from all ministry for 12 months until my court case had been settled. And then eventually, I believe, I was squeezed out altogether. Please know, I know some people don't understand why I'm preaching after I read a prepared statement to the church on January the 31st, which was approved by the board and indicated that I would step aside for 12 months, and now within that 12-month period, I'm traveling and speaking again. But it wasn't my choice to step aside from preaching and leading. It was a requirement of my employers. And of course, sadly, I'm no longer an employee of Hillsong Church. And from December the 5th, 2021, the last time I preached at Hillsong Church, it was 9 months of not standing on a platform or speaking publicly at all. But at the end of August, I started speaking in various cities every week in the USA, which has been a rich tonic for my soul. We're so grateful for the open embrace we've received from so many within the body of Christ all over the globe. Bobby and I have made no firm decisions on what our future may look like, but I'm believing for an extremely fruitful next decade. We're holding on to a scripture I've used multiple times to encourage others, being confident of this very thing. He who has begun a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. I think the hardest part to understand for Bobby and I, and the most difficult part, has been the loss of relationships. It's been quite heartbreaking for us both, as some people have just disappeared out of our lives. But then I must say we're also thankful to God for the many who have proven themselves to be the brothers who were born for adversity, or the friends that stick closer than a brother that the Bible speaks about. And we're grateful for the immense support we've received from pastors and from the body of Christ, as I said, all over the world. Well, Bobby is a beautiful woman, and a woman of immense integrity. And of course, she's done absolutely nothing wrong. But in March, she was leading what was her 110th Global Colour Conferences. Over 26 years, she's hosted 110 conferences with hundreds of thousands, perhaps even into the millions of people reached. And as she spoke and led online at this year's conference, with tens of thousands of delegates and with so many people around her, to then find herself ostracized just 3 short weeks later, and the lack of support that she's received since then has been devastating for her. Well, let me talk a bit about the future. Bobby and I, before my resignation, were praying about the future at Hillsong Church and when would be a good time to transition into more of a founding pastor role. On August the 14th, 2023, it would be 40 years since we founded our church. And we were depositing into Peter and Laura Toginavalu, Peter and Laura Toggs, in terms of potentially overseeing Hillsong Australia in the future. Our plans and what, to be honest, I believe was God's will, was not necessarily something that we had shared with Peter and Laura fully, but they've been maturing so beautifully and are clearly gifted and talented, and I think they're anointed. And Bobby also dreamed of Laura continuing the mission of colour conferences and the colour sisterhood, as she clearly carries Bobby's DNA. But of course, outside of a miracle, I guess that's not likely to happen now. Colour was Bobby's vision. It was her revelation. It was her initiative. And it carried her DNA. So finally, we're so grateful for our 3 adult children and their families who have remained resolute during this season, even though, to a point, they've all also been profoundly impacted by the events of 2022. As I guess happens in seasons like this, there's so much false narrative, gossip, speculation, and all sorts of rumors out there, not just about me, actually, but even to a point, judgmental attitudes toward our family. I believe Bobby and I are the same people we have always been, loving Jesus, loving people, and in the midst of the storm, committed to getting back to loving life. Every time, naturally speaking, every time in my life, I have tripped up, and I'm clumsy, so there's been quite a few times I've had to dust myself off and get back up again. And that's how I always want to live my life. If I get knocked down, I'm committed to getting up again. And you remember the fundamental scripture in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall. All of us have fallen, fall short of the glory of God. You and I have fallen, but because of Jesus, that's not the label you wear. And I refuse to carry those labels any more than anyone else. I'm flawed, I've been humbled, but I'm not living fallen, and I'm not living disgraced. I'm living as a child of God with my head held high, chosen, called, graced, and with a God-given future and hope. So thank you to all those around the world who have shown Bobby and I nothing but love and grace. And thank you to our family for your love and your unconditional support. So many people have opinions about what I should or shouldn't be doing in this season. That's human nature. But I want you to know we are submitted to two mature and seasoned spiritual leaders who have been a blessing to us in this season. And it's their counsel and their advice that I'm following. So God bless you. Much love. And as someone once said, the best is yet to come.
I made a list of lessons that we can learn from Brian Houston. Okay, so I want you guys to get these lessons here. I took some notes, and I just want us to...
There's some notes on his spiel. I have so many thoughts right now, but I want to hear these. So.
Well, yeah, I'll let you share your thoughts. First I want to make sure that you get all of the valuable lessons out of this. Okay. If you want to stay at your job, right, this is number one. This is just a good piece of advice.
Lesson number one.
If you want to stay at your job, just hand a letter of resignation to the board, because they'll love you so much that they're going to ask you to stay and help you figure out how to do it.
They're going to fight for you.
That struck me. It's like, I thought they would fight for me. I'm like, what?
If you pay a therapist enough, they will tell you that you're not an alcoholic, even if you are.
That's good to know. Good to know.
When you've been accused of horrible crimes is a great time to do a shameless book plug.
That's right. Yeah, live, love, lead.
It's okay to abuse drugs if you travel a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was stressed out, so yeah, makes sense.
Also, it's okay to break a promise that you made if you're fired from your job. Also, you can know God's will until you're fired from your job. Also, Romans 3:23 is the absolute perfect get out of jail free card for Christians. So
hey, we've all fallen. We've all fallen.
It's true. So I love how he opens the video with, "I'm not going to talk about the board," and then he talks about the board the entire video.
Well, it sounds like he put a lot of blame on the board.
He put all the blame on the board.
Yeah,
he didn't take any blame for himself. Not one inkling of blame.
It's the board's fault.
Oh, yes. Also, I forgot this one. It's okay to simultaneously abuse drugs and alcohol at the same time as long as you only do it once.
It's just just one time. Everybody makes mistakes. We've all sinned.
No, but he mentions, he's like, I know a lot of people don't understand why I said I wasn't going to preach for a while, and then I did it anyway. And then he doesn't explain why he did it anyway. Because he literally, before he mentions, well, they fired me, so I don't work at Hillsong anymore. It was my employers who wanted me to do that. It wasn't me. It doesn't matter. You still agreed to do it, number one, whether it was your idea or not. Number two, he also says that he preached at Hillsong again after agreeing not to, before he left. So there's no real explanation there. And I also like that at the end he said that we're the same people we've always been. I think he was speaking the truth there. Let us just one final thought about this whole thing. Just some context for you. His court hearing on whether or not he covered up his father's sexual abuse is in like a couple weeks.
Right.
This is not a good idea. Making this video before the hearing is a bad idea.
One of the things I was wondering, like he didn't speak on it that much, and I figured it was for legal reasons.
In fact, you'll notice he said, the crime that I was accused of, I'm going to fight against. He doesn't even say what the crime was.
Right. Yeah, that's right. That's the only time he mentions it. I'm curious if he thinks that his lawyer has some kind of silver bullet, and he's like he's just gonna take a gamble and just be like, you know what, maybe I'll get away with this.
But why don't you just wait a couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean that would be the wisest thing to do. But maybe he's trying. I don't know. Here's what I'll say about this. It's interesting because like you read this article and you were thinking of something that Pastor Jeff said, and I was thinking of Pastor Jeff's sermon from the week prior about
So very good.
the role of a shepherd, right?
Remembered last week's sermon.
Yeah, and so the whole point was like character is non-negotiable. And I was having this conversation later this week about like character versus like stumbling, right? Like versus like I said something goofy in a sermon versus I'm emotionally, abusing somebody. Like there's these different levels of like, okay, this is like serious, and this is just like character is. What I'm saying is character is non-negotiable, right? And some people align character with like he's right. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So if you made like a really bad analogy, right? I think of Louis Giglio, for example. He had talked about white blessing.
I remember this.
Yeah, right. Remember, he was trying to like redeem the white privilege thing and say it's a blessing that we should be using for the good of the anti-racism movement. He was well intentioned, but like Lecrae and some
definitely
of his,
it came off flat.
They were like, bro, you should not have done that, And so like that's not a character thing. That was just a dumb thing, right? But when it comes to character things, I really think you cannot just turn around and say, I'm going to have the same exact level of authority. And this has been from personal experience in ministry. There's a lot of guys that were here, like in leadership, whether it be senior pastor or, executive pastor, and they had issues with alcohol, not necessarily covering up abuse. I think that's pretty much done. Like you're done with ministry at that point. But if you're talking about abuse and recovery, like of like drugs and alcohol, I've seen those people come back around to ministry, but the ones that make it are the ones that say, I've blown it on the character thing, and I'll never be a senior leader again. And what these guys do is they become counselors or recovery activists. So if Brian Houston was here coming and say, hey, I'm starting a brand new ministry for people who struggle with alcohol abuse, and I want to help the victims of sexual abuse because of my mistakes, right? Like if this was a totally different thing, if you're saying I failed here, but I want to work towards the areas that I failed in. I've seen this happen all the time in ministry, and it's a pretty cool thing when it happens. Something like that makes sense, but he's saying, I know I failed. Well, he's denying that he failed in all these character things, but here are all these character things, but it's we all sin, it's whatever. So it's just a totally different angle from like, I guess what I'm trying to say is it is possible for someone like Brian Houston. Well, maybe not because of the sexual abuse thing. But if that wasn't part of it, it is possible for people like him to bounce back, but not by saying, I'm who I always was, which like you said, there's some truth to that. Not by not admitting that there has to be that admission of guilt, and admission of I failed to be what I set out to be,
Yeah, the more I see all of this stuff play out, not just with Hillsong and Brian Houston, but you hear about these scandals all the time. I truly despise celebrity Christian culture.
Yeah,
it's like, well, and I think about what he was talking about, like with his the sleeping pills, and he's like, I was so stressed out, I was taking planes all over the world. Like, if your ministry is that big and you like are so essential to your ministry that you're taking plane flights all over the world and you're at all these conferences and stuff, like you are too big. You have too much.
I think biblically,
too much power.
You could argue that you're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
The fact that there's not enough lay people and deacons and elders to facilitate, and there should be. But again, like you don't want that. Like if you watch the documentary and you like people that are trying to build a platform, they don't want other people doing their ministry.
Right. They want to be the ones on the top.
Right. Because if little Bobby Brown is the elder that's there at their house when you know what I mean, like not that there wasn't any level of that, but I'm just saying like I agree with you. Like I hate the celebrity pastor culture because what it does is it makes it about that person needing to be there and the preaching.
Brian Houston needs to be at our conference,
right? Because somebody from the boards, they wouldn't be as dynamic, but maybe they would speak the same message. That's all superficial stuff. It doesn't make any sense.
What I also find interesting is not just from this interview, but from seeing a couple other clips from Hillsong, he's not even that dynamic of a speaker. There's some of these guys I don't understand how they got so famous because like they're not even very good at it.
So another thing I'll mention too that's interesting that this is coming out now because Carl Lentz, I don't know if you guys saw this, but he posted like a black and white photo of him and his family. And he's like, it's been X amount of years since this all went down and we're recovering and doing the work and putting it in. And I'm just like, how did that conversation go with his wife? Like like if you're putting this on Twitter, it's got like 20,000 likes or whatever, like on Instagram, like, are you really like? I'm not trying to question people's motives totally, but like, why are you letting people know that you're healing your family, right? Like we don't need to know that right now.
Because
that's
you want to be
within the family stuff.
Right. But there can only be an ulterior motive for that.
Yeah,
right.
It's because you want to get your platform back. You're trying to bounce back, and you want to be seen.
If you really cared about that, you would just take care of your family and take your ball and go home. And like you said, maybe come out and start a marriage recovery. I don't know. Like I don't think that people are irredeemable, but like I think that there does come a point where if you fail on a level of integrity, then you have to revisit, okay, what does ministry look like for me, if it looks like anything at all?
Yeah, and certainly you can't rush back into it. I mean, it's just, well, I mean, it's like they feel entitled to it. I mean, the fact that all of, I just, you got to understand, like, this is bad press for Hillsong.
Yeah.
The board would not have done this without a reason. This wasn't just they decided one day they really didn't like Brian Houston and they just were going to get rid of him, because that's not convenient for them, and it doesn't serve any sort of bottom line for their business. Right after this documentary comes out, and that doesn't happen for no reason. And this entire video, I was trying to watch it with an open mind because I actually know some people, and they may even be watching this video right now, who are like, well, he apologized, we need to show grace and all this stuff. And he didn't apologize. I agree that we need to show grace, and I pray that God does something in his life. But I thought that video was a joke. There was nothing apologetic about that. I don't know what the purpose of that was. Am I alone in that, or
no? There was
are we
no
in agreement here that was just kind of him being like, I did everything right and I'm a victim.
Right. Yeah, that was what it was.
Okay.
And I had a few mess ups. But everybody sinned.
Yeah, but those were all 10 years ago, and
I'm sorry about that, but it happened. It happens to the best of us.
Yeah. Board is mean.
The board, it's the board's fault.
Yeah. Well,
if there's a theological takeaway, this one gets complicated. It gets nuanced, right? I don't want to go so far as saying, okay, look at the biblical model, and then all of a sudden, we're all in house churches in the catacombs, and that's not what I'm saying. But I would say that there is a precedent for the biblical model of, head pastors making sure that they work with groups of leaders in their church so that the ministry is spread out across the board, and it really feels like a ministry of the church, not of the guy, but of the church, right? And I know it's hard to do that, right? Even in my context, there's people that want to be connected to a certain pastor. And it's we're trying to create a culture where it's okay, here's your deacon, or here's your ministry leader, and here, it doesn't have to be the pastor all the time, because we're all God's people and because we all can minister to one another. And I think that that's what you need to be looking for. Not to toot our horn, I guess, but because we're not there yet. We're trying to push this idea of this. The biblical model is this ministry spread across the board, that leaders are leading leaders that are leading leaders, and this multiplication idea, so that when it doesn't all crumble, for one thing, when it's one guy, because it's the whole time it's been the church as a whole ministering to the congregation, but and ministering to one another. But then also it's just, there's a blessing there, because I think it's a more biblical model. So,
yeah, nice. Ryan, you want to do the thing?
Sure, I'll do the thing. Yeah, I eat.